Welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
The crap people see on highways is enough to make me stay home. One day when the robots finally take over, I'm sure the regional manager will just let me wear my MetaQuest headset and serve coffee from the comfort of my couch, in my favorite Bionicle boxers. That would be the day. But for now, here I am taking that asphalt path from heck to and from Dead and Roasted, because people have to have their sugar beans. Anyway, join me in the back, good friends, for a whole set of scary true highway stories that'll make your spare tire shiver. These are tales from the break room. Good Samaritan's Nightmare from Evan Z. I've always prided myself on being a decent person. The type who would stop to help a stranger change a tire or give directions to a lost traveler. But after what happened that night on Highway 16, I'm not so sure anymore. Sometimes being a good person can lead you right into the devil's arms. It was a Friday night. I was driving home from a late shift at the factory. The clock on my dashboard read 11:43 p.m., and every night around that time, the highway was always dark and empty. And I would be tired, as I was. The kind of bone-deep exhaustion that comes from pulling too many overtime shifts in a row. All I wanted was to get home, crack open a beer, and fall into bed. That's when I saw the car on the side of the road up ahead. It was an old Ford Taurus, a 90s model from the look of it, with its hazards blinking weakly in the night. As I got closer, I could see a figure hunched over the front tire, waving frantically at me. Without thinking, I slowed down and pulled over. I know what you're thinking. Who stops on a deserted highway in the middle of the night? But you gotta understand, this stretch of road was notorious for poor cell reception. If someone was stranded out here, they might be stuck for hours until help arrived. I couldn't just drive by. As I got out of my car, I called out, "Hey, you need some help?" The figure straightened up, and I saw it was a guy, probably in his mid-40s. He was wearing a rumpled suit, like he'd come home from a late night at the office. "Oh, thank God," he said, relief evident in his voice. "I've been out here for hours. Blew a tire. Wouldn't you know it, my spare's flat too." I approached, flashlight in hand. Sure enough, the front tire was shredded. "Man, that's some bad luck," I said. "I've got a spare in my trunk, if it'll fit your car." The man's face lit up. "Really? You would do that?" I shrugged. "No big deal. Just pay it forward." As I turned to head back to my car, I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. You know that feeling when you just know someone's watching you. It was like that, but worse. I spun around, but there was no one else here, just the empty highway and the stranded motorist. "Everything all right?" the man asked, his head tilted slightly. I shook it off. "Yeah, sorry. Guess I'm more tired than I thought. Let me go grab that spare." As I rummaged in my trunk, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The man's suit and the beam of my flashlight, I could have sworn I saw dark stains on it. And his car, now that I thought about it, I hadn't heard the engine running when I pulled up. If he'd really been out here for hours with his hazards on, wouldn't the battery have died by now? I was about to close my trunk and make an excuse to leave when I heard a noise from the nearby woods on the other side of the highway. A twig snapping, maybe, or a rustle of leaves. I swung my flashlight in that direction, but the beam could not penetrate the dense foliage. "Probably just a deer," the man said, suddenly much closer than he had been before. I jumped, nearly dropping the spare. Yeah, probably," I agreed. But my heart was going nuts. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get back in the car and drive away, fast. But I was already committed. And really, what was there to be afraid of? A middle-aged man in a rumpled suit? I was being ridiculous. I rolled the spare over to his car, trying to calm my nerves. "Let's get this changed so we can both go home." The man nodded, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Was it just my imagination, or did that smile seem a little too wide, a little too forced? As I knelt down to position the jack, I heard it again, a noise from the woods, and I swear it was closer this time. And was that a whisper? I stood up quickly, scanning the tree line. "Did you hear that?" The man cocked his head, listening. "Hear what?" "I thought I heard," I trailed off, unsure of how to describe it. A whisper, a laugh? Never mind, let's just get this done. I knelt back down. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the jack in place. Then I saw it. There in the grass next to the flat tire, half hidden by a shadow, a nail, a big one, like the kind used in construction. But this wasn't just any nail. The end was sharpened to a wicked point and the head was painted red. My blood ran cold. I'd heard stories about this. Warnings passed around at truck stops and on internet forums. Gangs or psychos would place sharpened nails on the shoulder of the road, wait for someone to get a flat tire, and then I stood up slowly, trying to keep my voice steady. "You know what? I just remembered I have somewhere to be. I'm really sorry, I'm gonna have to..." I never finished that sentence. As I turned, I saw the man's face change. The friendly mask slipped away, replaced by something cold and predatory. And he was no longer alone. 2 more figures had emerged from the woods. They were dressed in all black, their faces obscured by dark masks. One of them was holding something that glinted in the moonlight. A knife? Now, the man in the suit said, his voice no longer friendly. "Don't be rude, we're just getting started." I ran. I've never run so fast before. I could hear them behind me, their footsteps pounding on the asphalt. I reached for my car door handle, praying I'd left it unlocked. The door opened, and I threw myself inside, fumbling with my keys. The engine roared to life just as one of those masked figures reached my window. I saw the knife come down, heard the screech of metal on metal as it scraped along my door. I floored it, tires squealing. In my rearview mirror, I could see the 3 of them standing in the road, watching me go. The man in the suit even raised his hand in a mock wave. I drove for miles, shaking so badly I could barely keep the car on the road. I didn't stop until I made it to a well-lit gas station, where I finally called the police. They searched the area, of course, but found nothing. No stranded car, no sharpened nails, just an empty stretch of highway. They took my statement, but that's all it came to. Every time I drive that dang highway at night, I remember that event, that man's face as it changed, the glint of the knife in the moonlight, and I can't help but drive as fast as I can to get away from there, double-checking my doors to make sure they're locked. Because now I know the truth. The real monsters aren't hiding in the woods or under your bed. Sometimes they're standing right next to you, wearing a friendly smile and asking for help. And by the time you realize it, it's almost too late. 3 a.m. crossing. From eldershelder. I work at a factory and the whistle blows at 2:45 a.m., signaling the end of another grueling night shift. That's how it was that night. I clocked out, exchanged tired nods with my coworkers, and shuffled to my old pickup truck. It was a Tuesday morning, or would you call that Monday night still? After working months with these hours, the days and nights start to blend together. The drive home that night was the same as it always was. 20 minutes of dark, winding country roads with only my headlights and the occasional glare of a passing truck to keep me company. I knew every pothole, every curve, every faded line on the asphalt. I could probably drive it with my eyes closed. Not that I would try, of course. As I turned on the final stretch of highway, a mile from my house, I let myself relax a bit. The classic rock I'd been listening to played softly in the background. My eyes were heavy, but I was nearly home. Just a few moments away, and I'd be in bed, dead to the world until my alarm dragged me back to reality at noon. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a deer. We get a lot of them out here, and they're always darting across the road at the worst possible moments. But as my headlights swept across the figure, I realized real quick, this was no deer. It was tall, about 7 feet, standing upright in the middle of the road. It was covered in dark, matted fur with long arms that hung almost to its knees, and its face was horrible, a long snout filled with teeth that gleamed in the harsh light of my high beams, and its eyes reflected back at me, glowing an unnatural yellow. I slammed on the brakes, the truck's tires screeching. For a moment, we just stared at each other, me gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white, and this thing, this impossible creature that should not exist outside of horror movies and campfire stories. Its ears twitched, and I swear I saw its nostrils flare, like it was scenting the air, scenting me. A low growl rumbled from its chest. I'm not sure how long we sat there, locked in this surreal standoff. Seconds or minutes? My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. Was it a bear? Was it some kid or crazy in a costume? A hallucination brought on by too many night shifts and not enough sleep. But I knew deep in my gut, I was seeing something very real. As real as the steering wheel under my hands, as real as the sweat beating up on my forehead. Slowly, so slowly, that creature turned its massive head towards the woods on the side of the road. Then it glanced back at me one last time, those yellow eyes seeming to stare right into my soul. Then, in a movement far too graceful for something its size, it loped across the road and disappeared into the trees. I sat there for a long time, engine idling, classic rock still playing softly in the background. My hand shook as I fumbled for my phone, thinking I should call someone. But who? The police? Animal control? The local freaking news? What would I say? Hello? I've just seen a werewolf cross Highway 16. They would think I was drunk. Eventually, I put the truck back in drive and crept forward, half expecting that creature to leap out at me at any moment. But the road remained empty, thank God. Those woods stayed quiet. I made it home in a daze, barely remembering the last mile of the drive. As I locked my front door in a hurry behind me, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Safe at last. I was safe. As I stood there in my dark living room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The world felt bigger somehow, stranger, more dangerous. I stayed up a little longer than I should have, too scared to sleep for a while. Kept thinking about what could be out there. After all, I'd seen that thing only a mile from my house. When I did fall asleep, I woke up before the sun rose, and I just stared out the window waiting for the sun to rise over the trees. Since that night, I've driven that road hundreds of times, and I've never seen it again. I've told a few coworkers, the ones who are more interested in that kind of stuff, who believe in ghosts and the paranormal. They believe me, but it doesn't really help. I'm still creeped out by my own neighborhood. The 3 nights I'll never forget. From Patrolman 24. I've been a highway patrol officer for a long time. I've seen my fair share of strange things. Drunk drivers doing the impossible. wildlife where it shouldn't be, even the occasional UFO report from an overly tired trucker. But what I experienced over 3 rainy nights on the highway, it's something I still can't explain. Before I get into it, you need to understand a few things about that highway. It's a long stretch of road cutting through some of the most remote parts of the state. Miles of nothing but trees on both sides, with the occasional small town breaking up the monotony. Cell reception is spotty at best, and on rainy nights, it can feel like you're the only person left in the world. I'm not the type to believe in ghosts or monsters. I deal in facts, what I can see and what I can touch. But those 3 nights shook my beliefs to the core. I'm sharing this story now because I need to know if anyone else has seen something like what I saw. It started on a Tuesday night. The rain had been coming down steady all day, and by the time my shift started, at 8 p.m., it was a full-on deluge. Visibility was low, and I knew it was going to be a long night of watching for hydroplaning cars and the occasional fool driving without lights. Around 11 p.m., I got a call about a stranded motorist near mile marker 117. As I approached the area, I saw a car on the shoulder. Their hazard lights were blinking. As was standard procedure, I pulled up behind them and called in my location. That's when things got weird. As I got out of my cruiser, I noticed something odd about the car. It looked old, not just a few years old, but like something from the 50s. A big, bulky Chevrolet with fins and chrome bumpers. In the pouring rain, it almost seemed to shimmer, like it wasn't quite solid. I approached cautiously, hand on my holster out of habit. "Hello?" I called out. "Highway Patrol. You folks okay in there?" No response. I got closer, shining my flashlight into the car. Empty. Not just empty, but pristine. The seats looked like they'd never been sat in. The dashboard was untouched by time or use. I radioed in, asking if there had been any reports of people walking along the highway. Nothing. I searched the area for about 30 minutes, but there was no sign of the driver or passengers. When I got back to the car to call for a tow truck, my blood ran cold. The car was gone. It hadn't driven off. It was gone without a trace. No tire tracks in the mud, no sign it had ever been there. I sat in my cruiser for a long time, trying to make sense of what had happened. Had I imagined it? Had someone driven it away and I somehow missed it? I called it in as a false alarm, much to the annoyance of dispatch. I tried to put it out of my mind, to convince myself it was just a trick of the light in the rain. But about a week later, it happened again. Same conditions. Pouring rain, late at night. This time I was driving along the highway when I saw someone walking on the side of the road. It's not uncommon to see pedestrians, even in remote areas like this. So I pulled over to offer some assistance. As I got closer, I realized something was off about this figure. They were wearing what appeared to be old-fashioned clothes, a long dress and a bonnet, like something from a history book. And they were walking in an odd, jerky motion, like some sort of malfunctioning robot. I called out, but I didn't get a response. As I got closer, they turned to face me, and it felt like my heart was about to stop. Where their face should have been, there was just blank skin. No eyes, nose, or mouth. Just smooth, featureless flesh. I stumbled back, reaching for my radio, my gun, anything. But as soon as I took my eyes off the figure, it vanished. 1 second it was there, the next, nothing. Empty road and falling rain, and that's it. I sat in my cruiser once more, thinking it over, shaking, trying desperately to tell myself what I'd seen was not actually what I'd seen. I didn't report this, for obvious reasons. The third night. God, I'm gonna have nightmares about that one forever. This was 2 weeks after the second incident. I was still a bit nervous, jumping at shadows and double-checking every call. My sergeant had noticed too, asking if I needed some time off. I told him no originally, but maybe I should have taken it. The rain was worse than ever that night. Sheets of water fell from the sky and wind howled through the trees. I was already on edge and this was making it worse. Around 2 a.m., I got a call about a multi-car pileup near mile marker 120. As I sped to the location, my fears subsided. People were in trouble and I had a job to do. I saw the accident before I reached it. Even through the rain, I could make out multiple cars, some overturned, some smashed beyond recognition. I radioed for backup and ambulances, then pulled over to start helping. As I got out of my cruiser, I realized something was wrong. There were no sounds, no car horns, no cries for help, not even the crackling of burning metal, just the pounding of the rain. I approached the nearest car. Inside, I saw a figure slumped over the steering wheel, but as I shone my flashlight through the window, I recoiled in horror. The figure wasn't a person. It looked more like a mannequin, but wrong. Its proportions were off, limbs too long and joints bent at impossible angles. I moved to the next car, and the next, all the same. These twisted, inhuman figures posed like crash victims were clearly not real, not alive, maybe had never been alive. That's when I heard something, a sound rising above the rain, a low droning hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. It grew louder, and with it came a light. Not headlights, not lightning, but a sickly pulsing glow that lit up the whole scene. The light seemed to concentrate, forming into shapes above the wreckage. Geometric patterns that hurt to look at, shifting and changing in ways that shouldn't be possible. Within those patterns, I saw something. Figures moving and watching. I could feel their focus was on me. And in that moment, I understood true terror. I ran. I'm not proud to admit it, but I ran back to my cruiser and drove away. I didn't stop until I was miles away, pulled over at a rest stop. Hyperventilating, I'm on the verge of tears. When backup arrived at the scene, they found nothing. No wreckage, no strange lights, no signs of any accident at all. The incident was written off as a false alarm, possibly a prank call. I tried to tell my sergeant about what I saw, but the words wouldn't come out right. Because it was the most insane, unbelievable thing I could describe. I took a leave of absence after that. Spent some time talking to a therapist who told me I was too tired, too stressed. But deep down, I know what I saw and I know it was real. I'm back on duty now, but I don't patrol the same highway. Can't bring myself to drive that stretch of road at all, especially on rainy nights. I don't know what's out there on that highway. Is it ghosts or aliens? Or something our human minds can't even comprehend? Or maybe I really am crazy. Maybe if you ever find yourself on the highway at night and you see a car that's a little too old and a little too clean and a little too quiet, don't stop. Just keep driving. As fast as you can, preferably, until you're somewhere safe and normal. Because there's something very wrong with some places in this country. Hitchhiker, from Derrik Dawnshield. Me and a group of coworker friends carpool, and we've been doing so for a few years. It's a long commute from our small village in Somerset to the office in Bristol, but sharing the drive makes it bearable. There are 4 of us: myself, Robert, Morton, and Liam. We're not exactly friends outside of work, but we've developed a comfortable routine over the years. Or at least we had, until a certain morning in late November, when everything changed. It was a kind of cold, damp morning that England specializes in, where the fog clings to everything and the sun seems to be a distant memory. I was driving that week. We rotate to keep things fair. I picked up Robert first, then Morton, and finally Liam. Same as always. The conversation that morning was the usual mix of work gossip, complaints about the weather, and half-hearted plans for the upcoming holiday party. As we merged, the fog was so thick I could barely see the car in front of us. Suddenly, Morton spoke up. Look at that poor sod," he said, pointing to a figure on the side of the motorway. "Who'd be out hitchhiking in this kind of weather?" Through the fog, I could just make out a man standing by the emergency phone. He was tall and thin, wearing what looked to be an old-fashioned suit. As we got closer, he turned and stuck out his thumb. I'm not sure why I did it. Maybe it was the weather or some misplaced sense of altruism. But before I knew it, I was pulling over onto the shoulder. "What are you doing?" Robert hissed. "We don't pick up hitchhikers." We can't just leave them out there," I said, already regretting my decision. "It'll only take a few minutes to drop them off at the next services." The others grumbled, but went along with it. I rolled down my window as the man approached. Up close, there was something about him. His suit looked pretty old, but in fantastic condition, like it had just been pressed. His face was pale, almost waxy, with deep-set eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Thank you for stopping," he said, his voice surprisingly deep and smooth. "Been waiting out here for quite some time." Where are you headed?" I asked, trying to ignore the growing sense of unease in my stomach. "Oh, just up the road a bit," he said vaguely. "I'm sure it won't be out of your way." Before anyone could object, he opened the back door and slid in next to Liam, who pressed himself against the opposite door to maintain as much distance as possible. As we pulled back onto the motorway, an uncomfortable silence fell over the car. The hitchhiker seemed content to stare out the window, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I tried to focus on driving, but still I felt like something was off. After a few minutes, the hitchhiker spoke up. "So, Robert," he said, "how is the proposal coming along? The one for the new marketing campaign?" Robert stiffened in his seat. How do you know about that?" The man chuckled. "Oh, I know all sorts of things. For instance, Morton, I bet your wife would be interested to know about those late nights at the office with your assistant." Morton's face went pale. "What the heck are you talking about?" he sputtered. The hitchhiker ignored him, turning his attention to Liam. "And Liam, my boy, how's that gambling debt coming along? Still haven't told your parents, have you?" Liam looked like he was going to be sick. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. "Excuse me? Who are you? How do you know these things?" I demanded. The man's smile widened, showing too many teeth. "I know everything about all of you," he said. "Your hopes, your fears, your deepest, darkest secrets. Like you, for instance," he said, meeting my eyes in the rearview mirror. "Still feeling guilty about that dog you ran over last year? The family dog, the one you killed and kept on driving away from." My blood ran cold. I'd never told anyone about that. Never. "What do you want?" Robert asked, his voice shaking. The hitchhiker leaned back, seemingly satisfied with the chaos he'd caused. "Want? Oh, I don't want anything. I'm just here to observe, to see what people do when their carefully constructed lies start to unravel." The atmosphere in the car was suffocating. Morton looked like he wanted to jump out, secrets be danged. Liam was quietly hyperventilating in the corner, and Robert had tears in his eyes. "I think you should get out," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Now." The hitchhiker laughed again, a sound that sent shivers down me. "Oh, I don't think so. We're having far too much fun, aren't we, friends? Besides, I am not done yet. Did you know Robert here has been embezzling from the company for years? Or that Morton's not really the father of his youngest child?" "Stop it!" Robert screamed. "Just stop it!" But he didn't stop. He kept going, revealing things that most of us didn't know about each other, each secret more devastating than the last. It was like he was feeding off our distress, growing stronger with each revelation. I was barely paying attention to the road anymore, too focused on the nightmare. When Liam, quiet, unassuming Liam, snapped. "Shut it!" he yelled, lunging at the hitchhiker. "Shut your bloody mouth!" What happened next, I still can't explain. As Liam's hands made contact with the hitchhiker's suit, there was a sound like static and a blinding flash of light. When my vision cleared, the hitchhiker was gone, just gone. No explanation, no trace, just empty space where he had been sitting. I slammed on the brakes, bringing us to a screeching halt on the hard shoulder. We all sat there breathing heavily, trying to process what had just happened. "What was that?" Morton finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. We all simply nodded, too shocked to speak at first. But then Robert asked, "Who was he? How did he know all that?" No one had an answer. Finally, I started the car again. We should get going to work," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. The rest of the drive was silent. When we made it to the office, we all went our separate ways, without a word. The secrets the hitchhiker had revealed hung between us like a presence. In the days that followed, our little carpool fell apart. Morton quit, and from what I've heard, he got divorced. Robert resigned suddenly, citing personal reasons. Liam just stopped showing up to work altogether. As for me, I've never stopped thinking about it, because we encountered something that was not of this world. But what that something was, I'll never know. Whoever and whatever that man is, he seemed to relish human misery. These days, I drive to work alone. I take a different route, but no matter which way I go, I'm still terrified of seeing that hitchhiker on the side of the road. And just so you know, I did end up driving back to the family that owned that dog. I confessed what I did, and I offered to pay in some way, but the family refused and quickly asked me to leave. Just beware who you let into your car. Encounter at the Billabong. From Yuey. I'm a long-haul truck driver in the Outback, and I'm here to share with you an encounter that happened last year on the Air Highway. It's not something I ever expected to encounter, and sure as heck ain't something I'll ever forget. Before I start, you should know what it's like to drive the Knoll Arbor. It's not just a long stretch of road. It's like driving on another planet. Hundreds of kilometers of nothing but red dirt and scrub. In a way, it's beautiful, but it can play tricks on your mind and test your patience. This particular trip, I was hauling a load from Perth to Adelaide. It was midsummer and the heat was brutal. Even with the aircon cranked up, it felt like I was sitting in an oven. I'd been on the road for about 10 hours, and the sun was starting to set. And that, my friends, is when I saw the Billabong. Finding water out here isn't completely unheard of, but it is rare enough to make you take notice. This one was just off the highway, maybe 50 meters from the road. In the fading light, it looked almost unreal, a perfect mirror reflecting the sky surrounded by gum trees that seemed greener than they had any right to be in this parched landscape. I'd been driving for far too long without a break, and the sight of water was too tempting to pass up. I pulled over, figuring I could stretch my legs and maybe splash some water on my face to wake myself up. As I approached the Billabong, something felt weird. The air was dead still, but the surface of the water seemed to be moving, rippling in a weird way, and it was quiet too. In the outback, there's always some sort of sound, birds and bugs, the wind through the trees, but here everything had gone muted. I was about 10 meters away from the water's edge when I heard something, a low sound, like a growl, that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I had never heard anything like it. Not a dingo, not a feral pig, not any animal I could name. And then I saw something. At first I thought it was a log floating on the water, but then it moved. 2 eyes rose above the surface, glowing yellow in the twilight. They were huge, each one the size of a dinner plate, and they seemed to be looking towards me. I froze there. I watched quietly as more of the creature emerged from the water. It had a head like a cross between a dog and a horse, but bigger than either. Its body was massive, covered in dark, slick fur, and its teeth, Christ, its teeth were like rows of steak knives, gleaming white against the darkness of its mouth. In that moment, a memory resurfaced from my childhood. Stories my Aboriginal mate's granddad used to tell us about the bunyip. The bunyip is a monster that lives in the waterholes and billabongs, waiting to drag unwary travelers to their doom. Everyone, including myself, figured these were just stories to keep kids from wandering off. But standing there staring at this thing, I was becoming a believer in real time. The bunyip, because what else could that thing be, started to come towards me. The way it walked was slow and deliberate, like it knew it had all the time in the world, and that I wasn't going anywhere. I nearly soiled myself and turned right around, sprinting back to my truck, legs like jelly. The terrified prey part of my brain woke up then, as I kept imagining jaws closing around me, something pouncing from behind. I scrambled into the cab and started the truck. The engine roared to life, thankfully without a problem. I then glanced in my side mirror. The bunyip was on the shore now, its huge body heaving as it dragged itself out of the water. In the fading light, I could see steam rising from its fur. It opened its mouth and roared, a sound that felt like it shook the very air. I floored it, tires spinning in the gravel as the truck lurched forward. I didn't slow down for several kilometers. My eyes flicked constantly to the mirrors, but subconsciously I knew I hadn't been followed. I'd made it away in time, and that thing probably didn't have the energy or desire to chase me. When I finally felt safe enough to ease off the accelerator, I was drenched in sweat and jumpy as heck. I made it to Adelaide in record time after that. I shared my story at a truck stop, and surprisingly, was met with other stories of similar things. Us truck drivers do end up seeing quite a lot on the road. When you're driving alone through the outback for so many years, it's hard not to see something weird. One driver swore up and down that he saw a bunyip himself trying to pull in a kangaroo at a watering hole. Another truck driver had been on vacation fishing and believes that a bunyip chased him through the water. There's a whole host of legends out here in the outback. Never thought I'd run into one myself. Attack from Above, from The Stronger Fishmonger. Back in the early 90s, I was a bit of a delinquent teenager. Dropped out of high school, never got my GED. The type of kid that had no idea what he wanted to do in life, and every kind of career path or job sounded like something I didn't want to do. But it didn't take long for me to realize I had to have a job to live. Food cost money, and you got money from work. And boy did I love food. I ended up getting hired on as a commercial fisherman. I'll say right here I knew how hard that kind of job could be, and it ended up being harder than I expected. But I fell in love with it. The waters off of the coast of Maine are gorgeous and relaxing. The smell of the sea, the rhythm of the waves, and when you can bring in a good haul, it's really satisfying. But this isn't about what I encountered while fishing. It's about what I experienced on the drive home. It was a Friday night. I had just finished a long week out on the water. We had docked real late, around 10 p.m., later than usual because of a problem with the boat's engine. By the time I had packed up my gear and said goodbye to the crew, it was past midnight. I live about 3 hours inland, in a small town nestled in the forests of western Maine. Usually, I'd stay overnight in a motel near the dock and drive home in the morning. But I was feeling a bit more homesick than usual, so I decided to make the drive, tired as I was. The first hour or so was uneventful. The roads were empty, just me and the occasional long-haul truck. My radio kept me company. I was really into old country songs back then. Country song after country song played as I passed through areas of spotty reception. It was around 2 a.m. when things got creepy. I was on a stretch of highway that cuts through a heavily forested area. No streetlights, no houses, nothing but trees on either side of the road. The moon was full that night, a detail I can completely remember. I first noticed something was off when my headlights started to flicker. Just for a moment, but enough to make me take notice. I checked the dashboard, but everything seemed normal. Maybe just some old wiring, I thought. Then I saw something pass in front of my truck. At first I thought it was a bird, an owl maybe, or a hawk. It swooped right down in front of the vehicle, big enough to make me hit the brakes. As it passed through the headlights, I realized it was no ordinary bird. This thing was massive. Its wingspan appeared to be about 15 feet, maybe more, and it was strangely shaped. The body was too long and almost serpentine, with a more reptilian head compared to a bird. I blinked hard, sure I was seeing things, but sure enough, that thing was circling back around. I saw it fly alongside my truck now. I saw it in the mirror. Leathery wings, a long neck, clawed feet, orange eyes like hot coals. I stomped that pedal right to the floor. I felt my truck push forward hard. But this flying thing kept pace with me. When I glanced back in the rear view, I saw it take a swipe at the side of my truck. In a moment of panic, I turned the wheel and veered the vehicle sideways. For a terrifying moment, I thought I was going to flip it. I managed to keep control. I then looked back in my mirror. The thing was gone, and for a second, I thought maybe it had flown away and given up, until I heard a thud above me. It sounded like it had landed on my truck. It then took off again, and it wasn't leaving. I kept seeing its silhouette, diving in and out near the truck. I'm not sure how long this went on. I swear I was going about 100 miles per hour by then. How could something that big move so fast? Now, you might expect a climax to a story like this, but you won't be finding one. One moment, the silhouette of the thing was swooping in and out, and the next, nothing. The ride was back to its quiet, normal self. But I sure as heck wasn't. I was far too scared to slow down. I made it home with record time, and as life went back to normal, I managed to convince myself that maybe I fell asleep at the wheel. But to this day, the memory is so vivid that I doubt that even now. What was that creature? What kind of flying thing is massive, looks reptilian and bird-like, and would attack someone's truck? Some undiscovered species? An alien? A dinosaur? I don't know. To me, even though I'm not sure what the thing was, it acted like it was just chasing me out of its territory, the way a bird might threateningly swoop around something to try to chase it away. And if that's the case, I'm very lucky. Because if it wanted to eat me, I think it could have easily rammed me off the road and done so. Now that's a disturbing thought. Believe my story or don't, that's up to you, and I get to live with it. The Thing at the Pole. From Utility Man Bill. Let me tell you why I recently suffered the worst concussion of my life, and why my belief in the paranormal went instantly from "who cares" to "we aren't alone." I'm a 40-year-old guy who works for my local electric company. Been doing it for 15 years now. It pays the bills and keeps the light on, literally in my case. Most days it's routine stuff like fixing transformers and replacing lines, but that night was different. It was a very busy Thursday evening. We'd been working overtime all week because of a big storm that had rolled through, knocking out power to half the county. By Thursday evening, we were down to the last few repairs, mostly out in the sticks, where folks are used to waiting a bit longer for their juice to come back on. Boss comes up to me around 6 p.m., says there's one last job that needs to be done before I clock out. Some line out on an old highway needed fixing. That particular stretch of highway was extremely remote. Really just a long stretch of asphalt cutting through miles of dense forest. Creepy as heck even in broad daylight, if you ask me. But it was my job, so off I went. The sun was already setting by the time I got out there. I found the pole easy enough. It was the only thing breaking up the wall of trees on either side of the road. I pulled up, flipped on the truck's work lights, and radioed in to let the office know I was starting. Now, I've climbed more poles than I can count, but something about this one gave me the willies right from the get-go. Can't explain it, just a feeling in my gut that something wasn't right. But I pushed it down, grabbed my gear, and started up the ladder. I was about halfway up when the first weird thing happened. My radio crackled, spitting out static and fragments of voices. I thought maybe I'd picked up a crossed signal, but then I realized it wasn't just my radio acting up. Looking down, I saw the truck's lights were flickering too, dimming and brightening, like they were running on a bad battery. "The heck?" I muttered, reaching for the radio to call it in. But before I could, everything went back to normal. Lights steady, radio quiet. I shook my head, told myself it was just tired wires acting up. If I'd known then what I'd known now, I'd have hightailed it out of there right then and there. I'd just about reached the top when I heard it. Footsteps clear as day, coming from the tree line. Slow and steady, heading straight for my truck. I froze, one hand on the pole, the other on my wrench, and listened hard. The steps were strange, not like a person or any animal, more like a shuffling sort of dragging sound, like something was pulling itself across the ground. They came right up to the truck, circled it once, then stopped. I even called out, "Hey, someone down there?" But I didn't get an answer. Only the wind in the trees and the faint hum of electricity in the wires. My hands were shaking as I turned back to the job. Told myself it was just some critter, maybe a raccoon or something. But deep down I knew better. Raccoons don't walk like that. I was working on the line when I felt it. A weight on the ladder. Like someone had started to climb up after me. I quickly looked down, but there was no one there. Just empty rungs all the way to the ground. By now I was scared, real scared. The kind of fear that makes your mouth go dry. But I was also stuck. You can't exactly sprint down a ladder 40 feet in the air, you know? So I kept working, trying to ignore the feeling of eyes boring into my back. I heard it again then, the footsteps, but this time they weren't on the ground. They were on the ladder with me, coming closer, slow and deliberate. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My whole body was screaming at me to run, but I just couldn't cooperate. The steps got closer and closer until I could swear I felt hot breath on the back of my neck. Slowly, so slowly, it felt like moving through molasses. I turned around. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, the thing I saw behind me was no person. It couldn't be. It was shaped like a man, sure, but completely wrong. Skin so pale it was almost glowing in the dark, bent at odd angles like a spider. And its face, it had no hair, no nose, just two massive black eyes and a mouth like a slit. I wasn't sure if it even had teeth, but I could only imagine they would be like needles if I saw them. It was crouched on the ladder, fingers gripping the rungs. And those fingers, each of them, I swear, was as long as my forearm. I screamed. I couldn't help it. And the next thing I knew, I was falling. I must have let go of the pole in shock. For a split second, I was almost relieved. Better to fall than to let that thing get me. But survival instinct kicked in. I grabbed the ladder, caught hold of something, a support strut, I think, and ended up dangling there like a goddamn Christmas ornament. I looked up, thinking maybe the fall would scare that thing off. No such luck. I saw it peering down at me, head cocked to one side like some curious dog. Then slowly it started to reach for me with one of those awful hands. Have you ever been so scared that your body just shuts down? That's what happened to me. I saw those disgusting fingers stretching towards me, and my brain just said nope. So I let go. As I fell, I remember thinking, this is gonna hurt. But everything just went black. When I came to, I was in a hospital. It had been a day and a half. Concussion, bruised all to heck, and one cracked rib. Doctor said I was pretty lucky. Could have died falling from a height like that. He asked me what happened, and I fed him some bullcrap about losing my footing, because I wasn't about to tell the doctor that I'd seen some gray humanoid thing. He would immediately assume that my brain had been damaged. And alien humanoid or not, I needed a paycheck and needed to get back to work. It took a few days before they gave me the okay to leave. I went back climbing poles pretty soon after, but I can't say that it was very fun. It must be like learning to ride a bicycle. You can do it forever, never forget how, but if you have one bad crash, you end up getting real freaked out about getting back on the seat. I kept doing my job as I needed to, but even now, several months later, I'm not completely comfortable climbing up the ladder and getting on those poles. Thanks for tuning in to Tales from the Break Room, the home of the scariest true work stories. If you want to hear your story narrated by me, send it to me at eeriecast.com/submit. We pay 5 cents per word for accepted stories. Help us grow by leaving Tales from the Break Room a rating and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast app. Check out eeriecast.com or search for EerieCast on those very same podcast apps to see our other exciting and terrifying podcasts, like Unexplained Encounters, the other show I host, where I read stories with a focus on the supernatural. To get some merch, go to eeriecast.store. And to unlock ad-free episodes of your favorite EerieCast shows and exclusive audiobooks, go to eeriecast.com/plus and consider signing up for EerieCast Plus. You can follow me on Twitter, I guess it's X now, at Dark Prevails. You can also subscribe to me on YouTube, where I deliver the same content. Just look for Darkness Prevails. Good night. I hope we can share another break sometime soon.